Good morning, Rabbi.
Good morning, Joe.
We have a guest today. Hi, Roy. How are you?
Okay, Joe, how are you?
Pretty good, thank you. Of course, a very serious issue these days is gun violence. On all sides, people are worried about the proliferation of death by firearm. And this is something I think that Rabbi, you can offer quite a bit of information about. But Roy, let's start with you. One of the first terms I think we need to address is ghost guns. Can you define what a ghost gun is for us, please?
Sure. So the ghost gun is put together at home. You're manufacturing it yourself. So you're buying the components and then manufacturing it yourself at home.
Manufacturing may be a little different word. You're really assembling it. When I think of manufacture, I think of making.
No, actually,
for the
that
metal
is,
and a mold. But you're saying Joe was looking to buy the parts, just like making a car. You go to the junkyard, you pick up the parts.
right. So
and
the
you assemble it.
ATF actually calls that manufacturing.
They do.
So
Okay, that's a technical term. Yeah, but in a
ATF.
sense, what we're doing is we're looking for the parts. We're taking them home,
Right.
like Legos or an erector set.
When you buy a shotgun, for example, you can take it apart and put it in a case. And then when you use it, you have to put it back together. Is that different?
If you go out and you want an SBR, you have to apply for a federal stamp, and that federal stamp, what happens is you get that lower has to be engraved with the manufacturer. You know your name on that piece. You're the manufacturer. It's playing with some words, but I'm just telling you what I know.
All these regulations and rules are designed to protect, identify, and otherwise avoid misuse. Rabbi, do you think that is the key to all this?
I think you just hit it. And one of the problems is a lot of the laws, a lot of the discussion really doesn't accomplish the goal that you're outlining. It's regulating the lawnmower and not the operator. It's regulating the automobile and then saying, well, anybody can drive it if they can reach the pedals, or even if they can't, you put blocks on the pedals, rather than focusing on the operator. And so I think we want to bring our conversation over to not the federal stamp, not you have to go through a checkpoint or whatever. We'll talk about that. It's not about the item itself. It's who has access, what training does the person have? But I think, Roy, before we even move into that, we have to we have to acknowledge that in the Heller versus the District of Columbia in 2008, that Supreme Court decision said that an individual has a constitutional right to keep a weapon for self-defense. And I like that as a starting point, because I've heard people still debating the Constitution. Well, until we get another Supreme Court ruling, we're not going to, we're wasting time if we debate that decision. Okay, so the decision stands that we have a constitutional right to have firearms to protect ourselves. Okay, so now we have something, a constitutional right, which is different from driving a car or becoming a plumber. There's no constitutional right to try to have a car or to be a plumber. This is a matter of the law, not our Constitution. So I'd like to bring us around then to what would be reasonable in terms of having individuals have weapons. And I want to start us with, I think it's silly because Roy's talking about short barrel, long barrel, 28 inches, as if size matters. I think what we want to talk about is a weapon is a weapon, whether it's a long barrel or short barrel. A mistake we're making is this distinction.
Right. So
I would really like to see us look at all, whether they're long, short, or medium barrels, that we're talking about a gun for self-defense or hunting.
Yep. So I think you and I heard recently, what makes a firearm dangerous is what comes out of the end of the barrel, not the firearm itself. So then we have to go back to the people to see what's reasonable, what works, what doesn't work to protect the public. Because you and I talked about this, you know, it's one thing that's a constitutional right, but we also live in such society that we want to have some safety and knowledge that people are safe carrying firearms.
So we have two things here. We could start with, there is a constitutional right to have a firearm for self-defense or hunting. Second, we live in Maryland, which is not a commonwealth. But if we look at Virginia as a commonwealth, commonweal for the common good, as you mentioned, second, a society. So we want some rules and regulations to protect its citizens.
And Roy, interestingly enough, one of the things I saw yesterday, and to which you spoke, is the ammunition itself is not regulated. Is that correct?
Correct.
Because I saw what looked like, I am assuming he was 18 because he was in there by himself, but he looked like he was 12, and he was haggling with an ammunition seller.
You know, 18, I think in Maryland, actually, it might be 18 and up, they can buy ammunition. But again, just going back to the point I made earlier, where Ken was going, was what makes a firearm dangerous? It's the people per se. So what's reasonable for us to regulate or not regulate? And again, it's a constitutional right. So we have to be careful not to overburden the Constitution. I think that's what we've been doing with a lot of these laws. But again, so if you even want to go over basic numbers, so based on what you're saying and worried about individuals, you know, first of all, we have to understand you're a citizen. You have a constitutional right to have a firearm, more for not just hunting and or self-protection, but there's other reasons behind that.
There's competition shooting. It's like bowling, if you will. You're throwing a 10, 15-pound ball
right
down the bowling alley to knock pins over, and you wouldn't think of taking that bowling ball out on the street and start bowling people. But it's a sport.
Right. There's multiple reasons why people have firearms. So we don't want to burden your constitutional right unreasonably, but just to look at some numbers, and these numbers are old, so don't quote me on the exact numbers. I was just looking at the numbers I'm going to use are a little older, I just know them in my head better, is there are 32,000 deaths a year from firearms. 20,000 approximately are due to accidental death or suicide. The other 10, 12,000 are due to homicide. So putting that in perspective, though, depending on what resource you want to go look at, anywhere from 1.5 to 2 million people a year save themselves with their firearms in the United States. So just depending on what numbers you want to look at, and you can even argue out stuff and look at lower numbers from other resources as far as that number of saves, but there's plenty of literature out there. So the question is, you know, are we going to regulate firearms so much and the people have them so much that now we increase the risk of death for law-abiding citizens? And we've seen that in other countries where they have very strict firearm laws, and other crimes go up.
Roy, let me stop you for a second.
Yep.
A lot of times, like with the statistics, we're looking at purchasing, at the nature of the firearm. I'd be interested to see what countries have instituted the rules for the purchase, for background checks, for rechecking. It's like a driver's license. When you turn a certain age, the eye test, and we have a serious problem with seniors who shouldn't be driving because driver's licenses are renewed and we're not checking their skills early enough. So I kind of think that we spend too much time focusing on the thing. Let's ban this, let's ban that, rather, or look at what that country did, they banned that, rather than, well, what are the rules and regulations and what's reasonable? I want to buy a firearm.
Right.
And what do you think of what I said about long and short barrels, that we should just include, everything should be included?
Yeah, I don't, again, that goes back to that conversation you and I heard recently, was what's the difference the way the firearm looks or what it does? It's the person who's using it. So we go back to what you're saying, and we can focus down on that in the fact that what's reasonable, and not to overburden the Second Amendment, but what reasonable people think to get a firearm. Now, I could, again, in the numbers are out there. Majority of people believe background checks are appropriate, including Republicans, independents,
Democrats.
So I think that plenty of people. The problem that you have right now is the NICS system, the National Instant Criminal Background Check, and the problem with that, as we've seen, is it, in 2007, it was the Congress passed laws to fund it, but Congress never came up with the money. So right now, states are not reporting to the NICS system. Like Maryland, back, and I'm using an old number again, I apologize, back 10 or 15 years ago, only reported 50 people with mental illness to the NICS system. We know in Maryland, as a rabbi can attest to, there's more than 50 people with severe mental illness.
Right. So let's stop right with that. Just again, on our list, we now have a system in place, system for doing background checks. It would make more sense to fund it and to penalize states for not putting people in it rather than penalizing people.
Correct.
So there already is something in place that would pick up on hospitalization, on inappropriateness, and we could also discuss maybe it should be tightened, maybe the question should be changed. That's a different discussion. However, we have something in place.
Correct.
And we're not using it. And there's no penalty with the states not uploading the information. And then added to that was a timeline. If the information wasn't uploaded or turned around